You know how you sometimes think about these big government systems and you just sort of assume everything works with some kind of built-in logic?
Oh, definitely. You figure there are checks and
Then
balances.
you hear a story that makes you wonder, wait, how did we get here?
Exactly. It's when you see a real person caught up in what feels like I don't know, a systems glitch that you realize how much those processes matter.
And that's really what grabbed me about the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia out of Maryland. I mean, here's a guy living there with his wife and kids, and then bam, he's mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Mistakenly deported. Yeah, right off the bat, that sounds like a pretty major misstep with obviously serious consequences.
It really is. And what's been happening since then is, well, almost hard to believe. We've been digging into a CBS News report from April 11th, 2025 that details this whole back and forth between the Justice Department and the courts after a Supreme Court ruling about his case.
Right. And it turns out just getting basic information like where he is has become this whole legal saga. It's kind of shocking.
It is. So for everyone listening, our goal here today is to really understand how something like this could even happen in the first place. What was the legal battle all about?
And what are the challenges in trying to correct an error like this one? We want to take you beyond just the headline and give you, a deeper look into the whole situation.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Maryland resident, family life, you painted that picture. What actually kicked off this whole chain of events?
Well, according to the report, the Trump administration accused him of having ties to the MS-13 gang. That was a justification they gave for deporting him back to El Salvador.
Okay, but here's where it gets really surprising, I guess. His lawyers are absolutely adamant. They say he has zero connection to MS-13,
Yeah.
like not a single criminal record in the U.S., and apparently not even one in El Salvador.
Wow. So the very foundation for the deportation.
Exactly. It seems like it might have been completely wrong from the get-go.
That really makes you question everything that followed then. And the report mentioned the government actually admitted a mistake.
They did, yeah. A U.S. immigration official in court filings admitted the deportation was an administrative error and an oversight.
An oversight. That's
Hmm.
that's a mild word for deporting someone potentially to danger.
Right. It makes you wonder, how does an error that big happen? Especially with someone's life on the line.
It really suggests a breakdown somewhere. And there's another layer here, isn't there? Something about prior protection.
Yes. It turns out that back in 2019, an immigration judge had actually granted Abrego Garcia something called withholding of removal.
Withholding of removal. Okay, what does that mean in practical terms?
So think of it as the court basically saying, hey, if we send this person back to their home country, they're probably going to be in serious danger.
Ah, gotcha.
In Abrego Garcia's case, the judge specifically found that if he went back to El Salvador, it was more likely than not he'd face persecution from local gangs.
So the government knew El Salvador could be dangerous for him. They were officially aware.
Precisely. Which makes the later deportation, especially based on alleged gang ties, even more baffling.
Wow. Okay, so summary. He had protection because of gang danger. Then he's accused of ties to those same gangs, deported, and then the government says, oops, our bad administrative error.
Yeah, it really does feel like just a cascade of errors, one after another.
Understandably, he and his wife filed a lawsuit then. What were they asking the court to do?
Pretty straightforward, really. They wanted the government to fix the mistake and bring him back to the U.S. And a district court judge, Paula Sheenis, she actually ordered the government to facilitate his return.
Okay, seems logical. Admit error, court orders a fix. But the administration pushed back.
They did. The Trump administration argued that, okay, even if it was a mistake, a U.S. district court doesn't have the jurisdiction, the legal power to order the government of El Salvador around.
The foreign sovereign immunity kind of argument.
Exactly. They said a U.S. court couldn't force another country to release someone, which, touches on complicated international law stuff.
Yeah, that's always a tricky area, the limits of one country's courts over another nation's actions.
Definitely. And this whole argument went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts even put a temporary hold on Judge Sheenis's deadline, so it wasn't a simple issue.
So the highest court weighs in. What did they decide?
It was unanimous. The Supreme Court ruled that the administration did have an obligation to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from El Salvador.
Okay, so help make it happen.
Right. And they also said the government needed to make sure his immigration case was handled correctly going forward, like the wrongful deportation never happened.
Yeah.
Basically upholding his due process rights.
That's a strong statement from the court, unanimous too. So the government has to act. But wasn't there a slight nuance in their ruling about how?
Yes, good point. The Supreme Court also told Judge Sinas, the lower court judge, to kind of clarify her original order, especially the part about effectuating his return.
Effectuate meaning like make it happen directly.
Yeah. They wanted her to consider the executive branch's role in foreign policy, where courts usually give them some leeway.
Okay, so facilitate, yes, but be mindful of the practicalities of international relations, trying to find that balance.
Seems like it. So after that Supreme Court ruling, Judge Sinas basically went back to the Justice Department and asked for some, well, pretty basic information. What did she ask for?
She wanted to know his current physical location, like where is he now, who's holding him, and what specific steps the government had actually taken and planned to take to get him back. Plus a timeline. Seems reasonable enough.
You'd certainly think so, wouldn't you? But the Justice Department's response, according to this CBS report, was, well, kind of stunning. They told the judge they were unable to provide that information.
Unable, like they didn't know or wouldn't say.
And they called her deadline for getting the info impracticable.
Impracticable. After a Supreme Court ruling telling them to facilitate his return? That sounds evasive, to say the least.
That's pretty much exactly how Judge Sheenis seemed to take it. During a court hearing, she directly asked the DOJ lawyer, a guy named Drew Ensign, why he couldn't answer her simple questions, like where is he?
Yeah.
And her quote, it really jumps out. She said, I'm not asking for state secrets. I'm asking a very simple question. Where is he?
Wow. That really cuts through the legal jargon, doesn't it? Just where is the human being?
Totally. It just underscores how bizarre the situation seems. A basic fact, his location unknown, or at least unstated by the DOJ.
So what was the lawyer's explanation? Why couldn't he tell her?
He basically kept saying he hadn't been given the information himself and that the administration was still, quote, evaluating the Supreme Court's order.
Evaluating. It was a unanimous order to facilitate his return. What's to evaluate?
Good question. He did acknowledge that Abrego Garcia's own lawyers believed his last known spot was in El Salvador, but the DOJ lawyer didn't confirm or deny it.
So basically stalling. Even after the highest court ruled, how did Judge Sheenis react to that?
Oh, she was not pleased, calling the lack of info extremely troubling. She even pointed out to the DOJ lawyer that, looking at the record, his clients, the government, had apparently done nothing to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, despite her earlier order.
Oof. So she's basically calling them out for potentially ignoring court orders.
Pretty much. She was clearly questioning if they were genuinely trying to comply.
So what did the Justice Department say in their official court papers? Did they offer more there?
Well, in the written filing, they kind of doubled down. They said they just weren't in a position to share the info Judge Sheenis wanted, stating, that is the reality.
That is the reality. Okay.
They argued they'd only just gotten the Supreme Court order late the night before and were still reviewing it, figuring out next steps. They said it was unreasonable and impracticable to reveal potential actions before they'd been fully vetted and agreed upon internally. And they brought up sensitive country-specific considerations. Again, basically saying dealing with El Salvador is delicate and takes time, more time than the court's deadline allowed.
Okay, so they're leaning heavily on the foreign policy complexity argument as a reason for the delay and lack of information.
Seems that way. They did say they intended to comply with the Supreme Court eventually, but they also sort of hinted they might assert certain legal privileges, which could slow things down even more.
Right. Meanwhile, while all this legal back and forth is happening, what about Abrego Garcia himself? What do we know about his actual situation on the ground?
Yeah, this part is really concerning. The report says his last known location is this notorious prison in El Salvador called CCOT.
CCOT. I've heard of that place. It has a pretty grim reputation.
Exactly. And what's particularly, I don't know, disturbing maybe, is that the report mentions the U.S. government is actually paying El Salvador to hold detainees there as part of some kind of agreement.
Wait, hold on. So the U.S. mistakenly deports him, and now the U.S. might be paying the country he was wrongly sent to keep him locked up in a known rough prison.
That seems to be the implication in the reporting, yeah. A U.S. resident wrongly deported, potentially held with U.S. funds involved. It's quite a situation.
That's incredibly stark. Can he talk to anyone? His family? His lawyers?
Apparently not. His lawyer, Simon Sandoval-Moshenberg, stated very clearly that neither the legal team nor his family has had any contact with him.
None at all.
None. And the lawyer accused the Trump administration pretty directly of playing games with their own lawyers and just not following court orders. He sounds incredibly frustrated.
I can only imagine. And for the family, the not knowing must be just agonizing.
Absolutely devastating, you'd think. Just complete uncertainty.
So, given this stonewalling, or at least perceived stonewalling, from the Justice Department, what's Judge Shanice's next move?
Well, she signaled she wasn't backing down. She indicated her plan was to order the Justice Department to provide daily updates.
Daily updates. Okay, so she's really turning up the pressure.
Seems like it. Daily updates on their progress in getting the information and, crucially, in facilitating his return. The legal heat is definitely getting turned up.
Okay, so let's just, pull back for a second. What we have is a man was clearly wrongly deported, a mistake admitted by the government.
Right.
A district court ordered his return be facilitated. The Supreme Court unanimously agreed the government has to facilitate it.
Yep.
And yet, weeks later, the Justice Department is telling a federal judge they are unable to even say where he is, citing complexities and needing more time.
Yeah, when you lay it out like that, for me, the really striking thing here is this clear tension, right, between the judicial system demanding answers, accountability, action, and the executive branch saying, whoa, hold on, foreign relations, sensitive stuff, it's complicated, we need time and discretion. It really throws into sharp relief how these branches can clash, even when a fundamental error seems clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you think about the human cost. I mean, just try to imagine being Abrego Garcia. You're stuck in a foreign prison, maybe CCAT, totally cut off. You have no idea what's happening with the case, that it could bring you home.
Or being his wife, his kids back in Maryland, calling the lawyer every day, checking the news, just desperate for any word, any sign of progress, and hearing nothing concrete.
Yeah.
Hearing the government that made the mistake can't or won't say where he is.
It really drives home how devastating bureaucratic failures can be when they hit a real person, a real family. And it raises these huge questions about accountability, doesn't it?
It really does. When something goes this wrong, who's ultimately on the hook? And what systems are supposed to prevent this, or at least fix it fast?
And maybe here's the thing to really chew on after we finish. What does it actually say about our government systems when a clear, admitted administrative blunder spirals into this situation, where the government itself claims it doesn't know the location of someone it wrongly removed?
Yeah.
What does that mean for the idea of due process, for basic individual rights, when the information flow and the action required just seem to break down so completely? It makes you really question how effective those checks and balances we talked about at the start really are in a situation like this.